Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome everybody to Paul's Monday Market Update number 231 for Monday, 13th of July 2026. I hope you're all well. Hope you can hear me. Hope you can see the slides as well. If you are in the room, it'd be good to know that the technology is working for us rather than against us. Fabulous to have people here. Hope you've had a good weekend. Hope you've enjoyed some of those sporting results over the weekend. Hope you're ready for what is going to be a pretty busy week ahead in markets. Okay, it's basically it's a week where kind of markets going to enter a bit of a crucial week as earnings seasons begin and the inflation returns to center stage and a whole host of other things. Okay. For those of you joining us for the first time, the Monday Market Update is just that. It is me flying through as much as I can share with you in the next 30 minutes, looking at strength and weakness within FX indices and commodities markets, looking at a few charts of interest at your watch lists, and then a look at the live markets. It is not a signal service. It's not trade recommendations. It's me sharing with you what I'm looking at, which may be of relevance or interest to yourselves. As always, you are very welcome here, but just remember that you are always responsible for your own trading decisions. And if you want a little bit more education this afternoon, 2 o'clock London time, I'll be running the Active Trades Monday Market Matters webinar. 2 o'clock London time, okay, the educational piece today will focus on is trading an art or a science. If you want to join us for that, you can register on their website or use that QR code and it will take you there. And as always, if you want a little bit more help and support, okay, to sustain performance during the next quarter, the VTP Trader Accountability Group is running, helping you build kind of discipline, accountability, and consistency in your own trading. As always, if you've got questions, you can ping me, okay? You can look at the bit.ly code or use that QR code to find out a bit more information. Okay, all right, let's dig into the main thrust, all right? So what is this and how does it help us? So this is snippets from my own model that I do every weekend, okay, called the STAM, where I'm looking to identify strength, trend, and momentum within FX markets and also indices and commodities. What's it showing us and what can it actually help us with? Well, there's plenty going on here. Just let's get the old drawing tool up here. We are into week 29 of the year, okay, for the 13th of July. Where's the strength and where's the weakness within FX markets? Well, we still have dollar, okay, and when I was doing this at the weekend, was top of the pile there, okay. So not a massive surprise, especially considering the kind of the renewal of strikes between the sort of US and Iran over the weekend, okay, and that has had that has a huge knock-on impact, okay, to markets generally. We also had sterling, okay, in second place with that. Once again, I've kind of sort of talked about this. I see it as a little bit of a false signal in the sense that you know, this will be the last week of Prime Minister Starmer's premiership. You can you know, make your own comments whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, but invariably we will be changing them. I think it'll be next Friday is the Messiah, that is Andy Burnham, will be allocated as Labour leader Friday, and then I think he becomes PM on Monday. So you know, as I said, I think it's a bit of a false signal for sterling, okay, because sterling has rallied and rallied well, okay, over the last few weeks, but I think it's just more a case of that people, you know, it hasn't been as bad or as terrible as people are expecting it to be. Now, that can have all changed when he announces who his chancellor is going to be, and I think that's actually who everybody's waiting for. And the kind of a cynical old duffer in me is kind of concerned that this is the pump before the dump when he announces some net zero nut job like Ed Miliband is going to be the new chancellor and just basically go further in destroying the economy. But as I said, that might just be my cynicism coming through there. Either way, all right, sterling has remained strong, okay. At the other end of the pile, what we have seen is Swiss franc, okay, rolled away there, which has been happening for a while now, okay. That's been coming on for a while, okay, and you know, I've talked about that every week, and as I say, as a kind of a stronger version, we've had sort of swing version. Canadian dollar has remained at the bottom of the pile. That's changed this morning a little bit based on the events over the weekend, especially as what we've seen with oil price pumping, and we'll look at that in the live markets in a particular moment. All right, that's what we're watching on. What we've also seen is Kiwi dollar. Okay, that has strengthened its way. That kind of that's what happens when you hike rates and talk about hiking rates more, and invariably that sort of leads us into one of the conversation topics for this week. As I said, it's going to be quite a full-on week. All right, as I said, we've got Q2 earnings season begins. All right, led by the major US banks. We'll look at a couple of them in the moment. So that's going to kind of set the tone for the week ahead. Tomorrow we've got CPI for the US. That's probably, you might say that's probably maybe the biggest macro event, and that is the sort of thing that could shift expectations for future rate cuts. Okay. Technology remains in focus. Okay, we're going to look at them in a moment. We've got ASML and Netflix. All right, they've got updates later on. That gives us a bit of insight into digital growth and AI spending. The oil price remains elevated following the kind of renewed tensions in the Middle East. So that has a knock-on impact in inflation and energy markets. Okay, bringing them into focus. So, we're kind of setting ourselves for a week of a bit of higher volatility because you've got earnings, inflation, and geopolitics kind of all competing for market attention. All right, that's what we're seeing there. So looking at kind of the sort of longer term STAM plan, I still have oil as a strategic sell, gold as a strategic sell, silver as a strategic sell, Bitcoin as a strategic sell. Okay, along with that, VIX is into kind of bullish territory there. All right, so we see FTSE is still strategic buy. We'll look at that at the moment, as is ASX, okay? But the others are a little bit mixed and waiting for any kind of follow through, and we'll look at those kind of indexes in a moment, okay? That's what we'll look to focus upon. So, as I said, expect high volatility this week, as all those things, earnings, inflation, geopolitics, they're all competing for market attention. That's even before we have President Trump having his say as well, because invariably he will want to. Okay, so all right, let's just have a quick look at the kind of latest STAM. So this is just to reflect, the kind of the very latest data. Okay, so this is, I'm going to pull this out around about midday. So this is one of the plugins for the BTP stage 2. And what's it showing is it's showing kind of sterling as kind of a little bit on that sort of top of the pile there, with actually Kiwi dollar, all right, sort of holding up there. Kind of dollar's weakened a little bit in this session, whether that is just kind of a reflection upon the sort of war on, war off, risk on, risk off, right? Sort of thing, almost like every 4 hour it changes at the moment, and we've been living with that for the last couple of months, haven't we? As I said, Canadian dollar is kind of strengthening. Look at the 4 hour numbers there. Okay, that's strengthening its way there. Swiss franc, okay, is kind of clearly at the bottom of the pile there. And interestingly, kind of Aussie dollar is also weakening. And as I talk about this on the stage 2 call, is that those Aussie numbers are just being held up by the weekly chart. So there is kind of a reflecting, what the kind of, let's say, the longer term STAM do at the weekend, but also just takes into account the sort of events of like last night and into this morning's trading session. Okay, let us switch across to some of the charts of interest. So just bear with me for a moment, and I'll switch us across. Okay, so here are charts of interest. So there's just always a few, 5 or 6 charts that I put up that are on my watch list. Okay, either because there's earnings coming up, there's events coming up, or there's a learning point because there's some fabulous price action or some terrible price action. It could be either that hopefully you might either want to add to your watch list or sort of just take a look at what it's providing you. So where are we starting this week? This is the CAC 40, okay, the French equity index, all right? So not something we cover too much, just on occasion, but it's starting to get of interest there. CAC, its exposure is also like luxury goods, financials, industrials, and energy. And so why am I kind of interested in this at the moment? So you might say it has been in a grinding its way higher, hasn't it? Okay, it's I see this as very much a horizontal index, as in there's some real significant levels of support and resistance there that hopefully you can see on the chart. We have been above 8,000, okay, since the sort of in May time. We bounced here off the 50 period moving average, all right, and we've ground our way up here, and we're at 8,500, which is kind of, as you can see, last time we were up at this level, it kind of fell away. And then last week, we printed, to me, that is still a bearish engulfing candle. Yeah, all right, there is a bit of a tail on it, but, it's a bearish engulfing candle, all right, the price rally there at that kind of 8,500 level there. And naturally, people are looking at the data. So you've got, as I said, you've got US inflation data, all right, that's going to drive European market sentiment this week. Higher oil prices will support kind of energy stocks and also on that kind of risk appetite. But then also, as I said, a lot of this is made up of luxury goods, all right, and those kind of luxury names, they remain sensitive to Chinese growth expectations. But I think it's more, for me, it's more kind of the geopolitical, more maybe domestic political events that are going on. Okay, what we have certainly seen is that it's looking like, regardless of the efforts of the efforts of the establishment at this moment, it still looks like Marine Le Pen is kind of odds on to win the kind of next presidential election. Now, of course, a lot can happen between now and then. There's an awful lot of chicanery that can go on, but I think that probably is one of the things that perhaps maybe is waiting on the CAC themselves, that kind of, let's say, domestic political turmoil. Certainly for myself, okay, we've had this kind of 8250 area, okay, 8250 area, which has acted as, pretty clear resistance in the past, and now you look and see, will that act as support, right? Will that act as support? Will we flip it from resistance to support, which would kind of negate this, or does this bearish engulfing candle take us lower through that level down to the 50 period moving average at 8,100? Okay, so I'm kind of going to be curious to see the sort of direction of travel over the next few weeks in the CAC, and we'll have a look at that compared to the DAX when we switch across to the live markets in a moment. Next up is JP Morgan. All right. So as I said, start of Q2 earnings season tomorrow. Okay, before the market open, kicks off with lots of banks. So you've got Goldman's, JPM, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. Okay, there's a whole slew of financial companies and a whole host of others, that has to be said, this week. But listen, JPM it's the world's largest bank by assets. It's that's what we want to see. Okay, what's it showing us? What's it implying for us? Okay, so they're going to be looking at, and in front of the kind of earnings news is, all right, is that has the investment banking activity, okay, is it still improving? Is that kind of threat, or kind of sentiment of higher interest rates, is that going to support banking profits? And I think people will be kind of more interested in sort of maybe the forward guidance rather than the actual headline earnings. All right, but that is because people are expecting good positive numbers. All right, so pretty much out of most of these US stocks. When I look at this on a price action chart, once again, for the most part, that has been in a great weekly trend, hasn't it? Great weekly trend. Bounced off the 50 period moving average, came beneath it, reclaimed it, bounced off it earlier, okay, back in May, and pushed to these highs. Now, it's got up here above $330, okay, where we had this higher, what was that, about 337. There's lots of wicks there, isn't there? There's lots of, it's kind of like a little bit of, we're kind of a little bit sort of above 330, but, no higher than that. And so what I'm looking for is, with the comments from Mr. Dimon and the rest of the team, okay, is that going to be enough to basically push JP Morgan to those highs? Or do the numbers disappoint and we drift our way back south of 330 and back towards that sort of 50 and 20 period moving average? That's what I'm looking at. That's why it's of interest, because we're running into earnings. People are expecting good earnings, but the price action there is, it looks like it's pausing there, doesn't it? And so, will the news help power it higher, or will it kind of sort of just take the wind out of the sails? Yep, as I said, along with JP Morgan, you've also got gold. All right, you've got Goldman Sachs here. Okay, they're also got earnings there repeated tomorrow morning before the open, along with I think Citibank and the Bank of America, Wells Fargo, etc. Kind of curious about this as well. Listen, everybody knows that they're a global investment bank that specializes in trading, investment banking, asset management. All right, so people are going to want to see, are the trading revenues, are they benefiting from that recent market volatility? Are the investment banking revenues continuing to recover? And also people will be interested in, deal activity and future guidance. Okay, so overall market sentiment is going to be positive, but it's Goldman Sachs, all right. So the expectations remain always demanding, all right. And when I look at this as a price action, once again, fabulous trend, isn't it? You hear me say this every week, okay, for new traders and investors, is that markets, or instruments never trend as often as you want, okay. So when there is a very good clear trend, you should not be fighting it. You should be looking for a way to ride that, okay. And certainly for most of those financial companies over the last year or so, that has been a great trend. Certainly Goldman's, we're above, look at this, $1,000, all right, big round number, $1,000. It has acted as support. We pumped higher, but then a couple of weeks ago we came back, all right, closed that small gap. I see us as, we're still holding above $1,000, all right, okay, and the pre-market is up a little bit for today. Once again, I'll be interested to know that do we get good kind of positive news and good forward guidance that basically pushes us back towards those recent highs, or alternatively, if the numbers disappoint or the forward guidance or the overall sentiment disappoints, well then $1,000 becomes a very clear line in the sand, doesn't it? All right, breaking beneath that takes us down, I think, down to that 20 at around about $940 there. Okay, that's first point. So hence why that is on my thing. I want to see how they do, but also it's the overall sentiment that we see within that financial sector. Okay, so it's not all financial sector this week. There's a whole host of other earnings coming out. Okay, one of them for Wednesday morning is ASML. All right, kind of world leader. All right, in supporting that kind of semiconductor machines, but also that semiconductor theme technology sector company. They're in the SMH ETF. All right, for those of you interested in that kind of stuff. So listen. It's that AI investment story. Okay, is this going to show that there's continues to support kind of long-term AI investment demand? Is there a good order book? Okay, is that that's going to be one of the metrics everyone's going to look at, and is there still sort of demand from China, right? And that naturally that future guides. Once again, it is still positive sentiment, but anything to do with that AI, that there's kind of high expectations already priced in. So people will be interested to see the depth of the number. For me, once again, all right, the weekly chart, okay, ever since here, all right, this was our little tariff tantrum. We came down, we printed that kind of bullish engulfing there, okay, April 25, and have kind of worked our way up. See how those moving averages all kind of coiled up. We broke it, we're above the averages. The averages are fanning out. The 20-period moving averages acted as really lovely support there on the weekly chart. We're pushed and pulled away from the moving averages, which always starts to get me a little bit kind of nervous. And then I start to look at the price action here. Okay, so we have a bearish engulfing candle, which is also a bearish key reversal candle. We then get a bearish rejection on a bearish pin bar, which tickles the soft underbelly of $2,000. All right, and then last week we kind of flushed the lows a little bit. All right, so pre-market is a little bit higher. A little bit low. Apologies. But I'll be interested to see, as I said, that the market sentiment is overall positive. But will they have the kind of numbers that keeps that sentiment wafting higher? That's the way I look at it. As I said, we have pulled away a lot from the moving averages there. Okay, so which has been great support. Will the numbers, okay, sort of, facilitate a reassault on that 2,000 level number, okay, or do we just go sideways for the summer because everyone's starting to get a little bit bored, everyone's getting a little bit fed up, all right? So yeah, as I said, that's why it's on my watch list for this week. Yeah, as I said, it's not all AI and tech. Okay, so we've got one of the old boys here. Okay, United Airlines, right, major US airline. Those of you who join us regularly know I kind of keep an interest in aerospace and defense sector. Okay, that's my kind of bag. It's what I kind of take an interest in. UAL, all right, United, they've got their earnings later this week as well. Okay, after the close on Wednesday, I think it is. So, listen, everyone's going to be keen to understand, right? Have these rising oil prices, okay, from earlier in the year, is that brought pressure onto United's numbers? Is there strong demand for summer travel, right? And not unsurprisingly, that means investors are going to be looking at margins and that forward guidance. I'd say probably the market sentiment is probably a little bit cautious on this, okay, due to those higher fuel costs. But I think people will be interested to see what's the outlook for that second half of the year. Certainly, when I look at this, interestingly, you can see yourself here, okay, that there was kind of the big round number of 100, all right, we were kind of underneath it, almost kind of building a base beneath it there, okay, earlier in the year. And then since then, we've kind of pumped our way higher. But, to me, that is I'd call that a scruffy evening star. Okay, it's not a technically clear evening star, but the way I would look at it is, it's kind of scruffy evening star. Okay, all right, we closed 126. Pre-market's a little bit lower. No surprise after the kind of weekend shenanigans. Once again, I'm looking at, do these numbers support pushing us back to those highs, back towards 140, or do the numbers, the geopolitical tensions, the rising oil prices get us drifting back to this kind of, I'd say that's around 116, 115, $116, which has acted as resistance. Could it now become support? All right. So I think this is a story that unfolds as the week goes on based upon the earnings and also the geopolitical numbers. And finally, before we switch across to the live markets, this is Netflix. Okay, Netflix. Listen, most of you know who Netflix are. Okay, most of you probably have subscriptions. All right, to the global streaming platform. It's been an interesting tale. All right, an interesting tale. Okay, for various reasons. Okay, but listen, they have got their numbers, their earnings Thursday after the market close. Listen, everyone's going to be interested to know, is the kind of advertising revenue, all right, is that going to remain a bit of a key growth driver? Investors want to know things like, is there continued margin expansion, and what's the guidance for the second half of the year? Okay, all of that will have an impact. Okay, I'd say it's probably a bit neutral at the moment, the kind of sentiment here. But when we looked at this a while back, this has been fantastic price action here. Okay, we basically literally drifted back south of 80, popped away up here, and then we pinned $100, 50 period moving average, which had rolled over. Okay, rolled over, printed this really big rejection, bearish rejection, kind of like, and it's been a great sort of bearish run all the way down. Here we are here, okay, around the kind of 200 period moving average here, $70. Okay, if you look at that, there's been a few wicks there, a bit of support there, and once again, I'm going to be looking at, okay, do the numbers build as a base of support here around $70-ish? Okay, do they build a base of support before we move higher, or do the general numbers facilitate a kind of a slice through the 200 period moving average and the 70? Okay, so this, to me, this is a decision point, and that's why I'm interested in it. Okay, it's a decision point. Okay, is this where we build a base to go higher, or do the numbers deceive and we drift lower? Okay, so that's why it's on my watch list, and why you might want to watch how that plays out over the next week or so. All right, so there you go, some charts of interest. Let's switch across to the live markets now, see what's going on, have a look. So just bear with us for a second, okay? And we'll bring that back up. So just bear with me 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, here we go. So this is one of my profiles here, indices and commodities. So I've got Dow on the weekly, NASDAQ on the weekly, S&P 500 on the weekly, Russell on the weekly, FTSE on the weekly, Nikkei, DAX, and oil. Okay, so interestingly, based upon what's been going on, oil has been in a fantastic downtrend, but we're kind of popping there a little bit. And that is just, if you're looking at in the daily chart, see how that's kind of, we're $68, we kind of, bottomed out at. And now we're here around this kind of, there's the 20s, the 200, this price, it's above $70. As I said, is this going to be support, or are they, the Americans, the Iranians, going to have a cuddle, and basically prices will drop again? Okay, so once again, all right, geopolitical tensions will drive this, and we'll see how that plays out over this week, and that has knock-on impacts, as I said, to places like United Airlines and Canadian dollar, etc. Okay, so we're at that kind of space there. When we look at the indexes, so last week I talked about how I was kind of curious to see what was going on with the indexes. It was a little bit of a breakdown, as in kind of Dow and Russell continued to work higher, but the sort of S&P 500 was kind of going a bit sideways, and NASDAQ was kind of, I thought, was coiling up a little bit. And I'd say, certainly when you look at S&P 500, certainly when we look at S&P 500, we kind of, I would say actually we kind of worked our way a little bit higher. And if you look at that, based on that, okay, that's actually the highest weekly close, all right, for the S&P 500, all right. That's, that would be bullish, all right, and it's the highest weekly close, okay. So, as I said, it is a major week ahead. Does that major week, basically support this, which means then you've got to be looking at, well, we've got to be pushing again to all-time highs. That's what I'll be looking at there. When it comes to NASDAQ, all right, I talked NASDAQ about how I thought it was coiling up a bit on the weekly chart, but even more so on the daily chart. What we can see here in the daily chart, I talked last week about how I thought this 50-period moving average was acting as real dynamic support, and as we coiled up, we kind of came through it last week and then basically reversed it. That's a morning star, which would be kind of normally a positive, but we couldn't really get above that 20-period moving average with any real conviction, and then kind of working our way down here now. So we're pivoting around that 50, around this kind of supporting level here, right? So once again, as I said, it is a major week ahead. So I'm looking at, is that number going to pump those tech firms higher, or are we going to sort of roll over and fall away? That's what I'm kind of curious and looking at there when it comes to the NASDAQ. FTSE. Yeah, it broke out of that coil, but it hasn't exactly, I wouldn't exactly say that's kind of filled me with any particular joy in terms of how it's worked, all right? And I still think, yeah, it's getting supported by kind of the sort of mincing around in the energy sector. But when I look at the daily chart, it came through it, but it came back down to it. 20 is above the 50, above the 200. Price is above the 50, and it's nudging its way back up. I just wonder, whether you've got domestic political shenanigans going on this week in the UK. As I said, personally, everyone in the UK is waiting to see who does Burnham announce as his chancellor. I think that is going to have a huge impact, and I think it will also have an impact on the FTSE as well. So until that time, we're crawling about a bit. So that's the way I look at that. DAX now, I'd said, I've been saying for a while that every time it got above 25,000, it struggled to hold it. And I thought, well, maybe last week they've broken it. We had last time Monday, the week before, we'd had a really strong push to highs. But as you can see, bang, we're back down at 25,000. We're holding above it. Okay, we did hold above it, last week. And if we go down to the daily chart, you'd look at that saying, we are above 25,000. We are holding above the 50, which has acted as kind of support there. Is this just basically now building a base above 25,000? That's what perhaps I'll be looking at there. Okay, and want to see, do we get lots of supporting wicks? That means that we push a little bit higher. But even its DAX, everything is going to be indicated or kind of take its lead from US market sentiment off the back of earnings and geopolitical tensions and inflation numbers. That's the way I see that kind of working out for us. Quickly look at gold. Last week I talked about how I thought, maybe were we building a base here at 4,000? All right, was this a chance, and were we going to pop our way back up to the sort of 50, 430, 380 area? As you can see, that basically the kind of the kind of war on sentiment has basically drifted ourselves lower there. Okay, that's what's happening there with gold. I thought, as I said on the daily chart, bit of a double bottom, push our way above the 20, but as you can see, we're back, and I expect us to come down to 4,000 as well. Okay, that's where I'd drift us down. That's kind of the war on is not necessarily good for gold at the moment. Okay, and so as long as that kind of tension remains, we'd be short-term bearish with that in terms of gold. Silver, not massively dissimilar in that sense of the weekly. I thought we'd hold around about 60, but you can see for yourself, we kind of continue to drift that little bit lower, haven't we, the last week? Okay, holding beneath 60 there on the at the moment on silver. Bitcoin. Yeah, Bitcoin, I was kind of talking about, where we once again, we build in a kind of a base double bottom there, triple bottom at 60,000, trying to eke ourselves above the weekly 200 period moving average. All right, I wouldn't exactly say it's doing it with any real gusto, but I would look at that interestingly. The 20 period moving average is going sideways. It's acting as dynamic support. The 50 is coming down. Are we just getting a little bit of a squeeze there? Is this all going to take its lead from the US dollar? That's what I look at there. Okay, and of course that US dollar is going to have its lead taken from geopolitical tension, a little bit of the earnings, but also the inflation numbers. Okay, and we also have Mr. Wash testifying this week as well. Okay, so people will be interested to hear what he has to say. All right, let's have a quick look at dollar. I know I appreciate it overran a little bit, but as I said, I'm always just trying to cram and share in as much as I possibly can with you. So this is dollar profile here. What's it showing us? Okay, Aussie on the daily, Euro on the daily, cable daily, dollar Swiss, Kiwi dollar, dollar CAD, dollar yen, dollar index. Okay, so a few interesting charts to look at, but as always, let's start with the dollar index. We pushed our way through to these 26 highs, okay, and have kind of come back, but we're still holding a kind of above 150, I'd say. If we go down to the daily chart, I talked about how, was this just a little bit of a kind of a bull flag that was building up there? I still see this kind of, look at this daily 20 period moving average, all right, acting as support. See how it is there, okay? It's still acting as support there, okay? Naturally, the kind of numbers are a little bit, I suppose, shaken about because of the events of the weekend. But then, as I said, you've got Vosh testifying, you've got CPI and PPI numbers, all right, okay, coming out over the next couple of days. We've got all those earnings, and you've got that geopolitical tension. All of it can play its particular part. Certainly, interestingly, we kind of gapped up on the dollar, but if you look, we kind of came back. All right, we came back, all right, this week and sort of dropped and fell down. And I wonder whether that is kind of, during the weekend, everyone's kind of a bit war on risk off sentiment, and then basically, then it sort of drops its way there. Okay, and that's has had its impact there itself. Interestingly, okay, that has had an impact on some of those kind of dollar events. All right, so but what we're going to do is, I think we're going to have a quick look at CAD anyway. That's the one I wanted to look at there. Okay. So I would be just keeping an eye on that dollar index all this week. Okay, that's what I'll be looking at. That seeing where it takes its lead from, and how that plays out. Okay, and how that knocks onto some of the majors. I'm looking at some of those majors. Okay, here's Canadian dollar, not one we've looked at for a while. Okay, but I thought we've had the oil prices pumped. Okay, this morning over the events of the sort of Middle East. So how has that kind of impacted Canadian dollar? Well, if I look at dollar CAD here, dollar CAD has been having been in this fantastic trend. Look at that. I mean, that's just a stunning trend there, isn't it? I'd be saying that's kind of stage 3, and is that rolling over into stage 4 now? That's what I'd be looking at there. Certainly that 4-hour chart, we kind of had a messy start to the week because we've literally had dollar strength and then kind of a bit of Canadian strength. All right, and that's the way that has played itself out. And when I look at kind of the start of this week, that kind of is a bit of a recurring theme. So CAD yen on the 4-hour chart, well, not unsurprisingly, okay, CAD has strengthened against the yen. All right, if the oil price pumps, no surprise, see CAD yen reflected in that. Sterling weakened against CAD euro, okay, as a weakened against CAD. Not unsurprisingly, CAD strengthened against the Swiss franc. The interesting one is it kind of weakened a little bit against the Kiwi dollar, but also kind of strengthened against CAD. So that's kind of an interesting one there on that Kiwi dollar play. So, is this just a little bit of a dead cat bounce based upon geopolitical tensions, or is this the kind of a case of, maybe a little bit of a base in oil and the Canadian dollar? All right. So, as I keep saying, when you're at the top of the pile, the only way is down. When you're at the bottom of the pile, the only way is up. And that's what we're looking at with Canadian dollar at the moment. All right, and as always, let's finish with sterling. What am I seeing here? Cable on the daily, euro sterling on the daily, pound Aussie, pound CAD, pound Kiwi, pound Swiss, pound yen, FTSE. Okay, that's what we're looking at there. Okay, so as I said, bang, what we've had is pound strengthening, all right, or rather dollar weakening and pound strengthening there. But we kind of run into the 50 and the 200 here. Okay, those of you who get excited about these things, it's a bit of a dragon cross, isn't it? Where kind of 50 crosses beneath the 200. It's not a big thing for me, but when as you hear me say, when price and the moving averages are all coiled up together, it's almost like the compression before the spring. All right, that's what I'm looking for, and that's what I'm interested in there. Certainly that 4-hour chart, it has ground its way up there a little bit higher, hasn't it? Okay, I'd be saying that kind of 4-hour 50 is kind of my guide. If we stay above it, we're bullish. If we break beneath it, then the kind of the all bets are off. And as I said, there's plenty going on in both the US and the UK over this next week that will have an impact upon that. We look at pound yen. Pound yen has broken out of that sort of, that coil, that wedge, that triangle, worked its way higher. We put in a bit of a daily evening star there, but it hasn't kind of followed through as of yet. All right, so it's bounced nicely off that 4-hour 50 period moving average. Okay, so is it going to get trapped there between the 20 and the 50? Okay, so we do have a little bit of UK data this week. All right, we've got Governor Bailey speaking to tomorrow. We've got GDP on Thursday as well. So we'll see how that plays. We'll see how that plays out. Is that are we going to see yen weakening that strengthens sterling, or are we just going to basically coil up there between those moving averages? Pound against Swiss franc. Remember what I was saying? This has been a great move because Swiss franc has rolled over. All right, so you've got sterling strength, Swiss franc weakness. That's what you want, right? That's what you want to see. Okay, that's stage 2 STAM. Okay, working its way out. Pound against Aussie has also been in that kind of move, but I wonder if that is just starting to peter out a little bit. I'd be looking for it to get roll over and lower between these averages, this 8-period moving average. Okay, double topped there. Okay, a little bit. See how does that play? Interestingly, pound against New Zealand dollar, which had worked nicely. We've got Kiwi dollar strength coming in there. See how that is kind of false breakout there on the daily chart, and we've rolled over beneath the 20, working our way lower. That's that kind of Kiwi dollar strength kind of working its way into the thing. And remember, as I said, sterling's been strong, but it's still weakened against there. Yeah, pound against CAD, all right, has been a great trend. All right, has been a great trend on the daily chart, but I wonder now is that sort of coming to a little bit of an end there? Okay. As I say every week, I am a better trader than I am an artist. Okay, I'm just kind of interesting to see whether we're just coiling this up here. Is this a bit of a double top here that it's coiling up before it kind of works its way down, which would be an indication of sterling weakness and CAD strength. The other good one, euro against sterling. This has been a nice runner for me. You heard me talking for weeks, months even, about this kind of 80, 20, any 6 sort of 20, 86, 30 zone and how it's acting as support. Okay, and each of the highs were getting lowers. That's a descending triangle, you'd probably say, and bang, the last couple of weeks it's broken and dropped there really nicely, hasn't it? Just broken and dropped. It's had a couple of weeks of a great run, working lower. But I wonder if that's coming a little bit to the end today. Okay, is this an indication? We've seen a little bit of euro strength. Okay, to today, as I said, is that just a bit of a reaction? All right, to some of the geopolitical tension, or is it the sign of something else? I'd probably be just looking here, giving myself a level to be of interested in. That's where I'd be looking at here. Okay, so above those highs of what, about 85.50. All right, that's what I'll be looking for. If it breaks above that, that's what I'll be looking at in terms of a change of that trend. Okay, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Let's draw it to a close there. I appreciate that we overshot a little bit, but there's so much for me to share, so much going on with you in markets these days. Anyway, I hope you found that useful. I hope that gives you a bit of help and a bit of insight. It is going to be a very, very busy, interesting week, ladies and gentlemen. So make sure that you're on top of the order flow, on top of the news flow, on top of your risk management. Have yourself a fabulous trading week. There will be no Monday market update next Monday. Unfortunately, I have to go to a funeral now, but we'll return in 2 weeks. Have a fabulous trading week, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care. Cheers. Thanks, Peter.